Have you ever wondered why a plate of macaroni and cheese makes you feel cozy, while a cup of coffee on an empty stomach can leave you feeling irritable? For decades, scientists around the world have been searching for evidence of a connection between what we eat and how we feel. At Harvard Medical School, researchers studied hundreds of patients and found that people who carefully monitor their diet and get enough protein, B vitamins, and omega-3 fatty acids are, on average, less likely to experience depression and anxiety. It turned out that up to 90% of serotonin production, the famous happiness hormone, doesn't happen in the brain, but in the gut, where trillions of bacteria live. These microorganisms respond to what we eat, and in turn influence the functioning of the nervous system. At Oxford University, an experiment was conducted. A group of volunteers were given either a balanced breakfast with oatmeal and nuts, or a sweet croissant with coffee. Just 2 hours later, scientists observed that croissant lovers experienced a decline in mood and decreased concentration. Meanwhile, those who chose oatmeal remained calm and alert for a longer period. Australian researchers obtained similar results after observing teenagers for 2 years. Those who consumed fast food and sugary drinks daily were more likely to complain about poor sleep and bursts of negative emotions. But there is also another side to the story. At the University of Colorado, it was found that a sharp restriction of calories in some participants led to irritability and even outbursts of aggression. On the other hand, adding leafy greens, fish, and walnuts to the diet helps stabilize emotional states. Although many people believe that chocolate is a cure-all for sadness, experiments have shown that if the emotions are negative, eating a chocolate bar only helps for a short time, after which the mood drops again. Meanwhile, everyone seems to think that sugar is simply a source of energy. But what happens to the brain after another piece of cake can surprise even the skeptics. The mystery of sugar. How do everyday foods affect the brain? Back in the 19th century, sugar was considered a delicacy, but today it can be found in almost every product from ketchup to bread. Scientists from the US National Institutes of Health conducted an unusual experiment. 2 groups of volunteers were offered breakfast with the same number of calories, but one of them contained hidden sugar. After just 40 minutes, specialists recorded that the pleasure center in the brains of people from the sugary group became activated. The very same area that responds to gambling or winning the lottery, the brain was literally demanding another serving. At Harvard University, it was discovered that if you eat sugary cereal for breakfast and wash it down with juice, your concentration level drops by lunchtime and irritability may appear. At the same time, after a protein-rich breakfast, participants in the experiment stayed alert longer and performed better on attention tests. Neurobiologists explain. A sharp spike in blood glucose forces the brain to synthesize dopamine. This gives a short-term burst of joy, but after half an hour, energy drops sharply, leading to sluggishness and even anxiety. Even more shocking results were obtained by a team from the University of California. Studies on teenagers showed that after 2 months, regular lovers of sugary sodas had an increased number of dopamine receptors, the very ones associated with the formation of addiction. In fact, the brain began to crave sugar the way some people crave coffee in the morning. Moreover, regular overeating of sweets disrupts the function of the hippocampus, the part of the brain responsible for memory and learning. Endocrinologist Dr. Robert Lustig discovered that excessive sugar consumption causes chronic inflammation in the brain. This can lead to headaches, rapid fatigue, and even difficulty making decisions. Hidden sugar is found even where no one expects it. For example, a single medium serving of ketchup contains as much sugar as half a can of soda. That's why many people, without even realizing it, increase the strain on their nervous system every day. But what's even more surprising is that in different countries, people's reactions to sugary foods can vary. For example, Japanese people have been found to be less sensitive to glucose spikes, while Americans, on the contrary, are more prone to sharp mood swings after eating sweets. Scientists are only just beginning to figure out why this happens. But some familiar foods that we consider completely safe actually turn out to be hidden enemies for the brain and the whole body. Hidden enemies in your diet, what isn't written on the packaging? While all the attention is focused on sugar, there are dozens of other ingredients that slip by unnoticed every day, yet have a direct impact on our health. The American Nutrition Association has found that more than 80% of all packages in the supermarket contain substances not mentioned in large print on the label, such as trans fats. Back in the early 2000s, researchers at Cleveland University proved that even a small dose reduces blood vessel elasticity just 30 minutes after eating and increases the level of bad cholesterol. But on packaging, they are often disguised under names like hydrogenated oils. Another insidious ingredient is flavor enhancers. Monosodium glutamate, first synthesized in Japan at the beginning of the 20th century, is now added to almost all ready-made soups, snacks, and processed foods. Harvard studies have shown that in a third of test subjects, glutamate caused headaches and temporary concentration problems just 1 hour after consuming only 2 grams of a product containing it. At the same time, manufacturers themselves list it on the label in very small print and sometimes even hide it under abbreviations. Even more hidden enemies are added phosphates, which are used to improve the texture of sausages, cheeses, and baked goods. A German study from 2025 showed that regular consumption of phosphates accelerates vascular aging and significantly increases the strain on the kidneys. But consumers often don't notice them at all. On the packaging, they are simply indicated as the letter E followed by 3 digits. Many products also contain hidden sweeteners that are not immediately obvious. The American Medical Journal has reported that sorbitol and xylitol, which are added to yogurts and snack bars, can cause bloating and sharp spikes in insulin. This is despite the bold sugar-free claims on the front of the packaging. It's the same story with preservatives. At Baylor College, it was discovered that the additives BHA and BHT trigger inflammatory processes in the liver, but under US law, they can be listed only at the very end of the ingredients list. Even popular low-calorie products can be deceptively harmful. In a Michigan State laboratory, popular fitness bars were tested and found to contain not only hidden sugars but also artificial colorings that disrupt the balance of gut microflora and can cause insomnia in teenagers. So while scanning the bright packaging, most people have no idea that instead of benefits, they might be getting a whole bouquet of hidden enemies. But that's not all. There are foods that spark endless debates and divide people into two camps. For example, dairy products, which scientists are still arguing about to this day. Are dairy products a friend or foe to your body? And now, let's take a look at one of the most controversial areas of nutrition dairy products. America, Europe, and Australia have traditionally included milk, cheese, and yogurt in their daily diets, considering them an irreplaceable source of calcium and protein. At Harvard University, doctors spent several years studying the effects of dairy products on bones. They found that children who regularly drink milk do indeed have higher bone density. The risk of fractures is about 30% lower. However, at the same time, scientists from the National Institutes of Health observed that among adults, an excess of dairy products can increase the level of insulin-like growth factor. According to some data, this substance is associated with accelerated cell division and therefore with the risk of certain types of cancer. In Japan, milk is traditionally consumed very little, yet the rate of osteoporosis among the adult population remains low. Studies in Tokyo have shown that the reason is not milk, but the overall balance of a diet rich in fish and greens. Meanwhile, Swedish doctors from the Karolinska Institute noticed that among women who drink more than 3 glasses of milk a day, inflammatory processes occur more frequently, and even the risk of cardiovascular diseases increases. However, some dairy products may work differently. For example, fermented yogurts and kefir. At Harvard, they concluded that people who regularly included yogurts with live probiotics in their diet had 30% fewer cases of infections and colds. The point is that probiotics improve the balance of gut microflora, which means they strengthen local immunity. It's also important to mention lactose intolerance. Scientific data from the US National Institute of Allergy show that about 70% of adults worldwide experience bloating and discomfort after consuming milk. This is especially common among Asian and African populations for whom milk has not historically been a staple food. At the same time, some groups, such as Northern Europeans, retain a high tolerance for lactose even in adulthood. Dairy products can contain hidden sugars and saturated fats. A single glass of store-bought fruit yogurt contains almost as much sugar as the same amount of soda. And a slice of cheddar cheese contains up to 6 grams of saturated fat, which is nearly a third of the daily recommended amount for an adult. At the University of Wisconsin, 2 groups were compared. One group ate hard cheese daily, while the other chose low-fat yogurts. After 6 months, the first group's cholesterol levels had increased by almost 15%, while the second group showed improved metabolism. While debates about dairy products continue, researchers are increasingly noting that 2 people can have drastically different reactions to the same foods. Even if you follow the same diet, the results can be unexpected. Why does this happen? Geneticists have found out. Why do the same foods affect people differently? Let's move on to a much more intriguing detail. Why can identical foods have drastically different effects on people, even if their diets seem to match down to the smallest detail? A large-scale study was conducted at Stanford University. They took 2 groups, fed them the exact same meals, and then measured their blood sugar levels. It turned out that for some people, after a bowl of white rice, their glucose levels spiked almost to values typical of type 2 diabetes, while for others, the increase was only minor. Everything was determined by the nuances in the work of gut bacteria, very trillions of microorganisms that literally control our metabolism. The next step was taken by Israeli scientists. More than 800 volunteers ate the same diet for several weeks, after which they were tested for inflammation markers and insulin levels. The results surprised even the researchers themselves. For some people, it was bread that triggered the strongest insulin spike, while for others, the same reaction was caused by potatoes. It all turned out to be about the microbiome as well as genetic characteristics. Geneticists in the UK have proven that mutations in certain genes can determine how quickly a person digests fats or absorbs lactose. One person can easily eat ice cream without any consequences, while another experiences bloating and pain after just a couple of spoonfuls. These differences are especially pronounced when it comes to allergies and individual intolerances. In the American state of Illinois, doctors have recorded cases where even a small slice of bread would cause intestinal inflammation in some patients with celiac disease, while others ate the same product for years without noticing anything unusual. The same goes for nuts. For some, even traces of peanuts can trigger anaphylactic shock, while others can eat a handful a day without any problems. The issue isn't limited to exotic foods. Even something as simple as chicken breast can provoke different reactions. For some people who are prone to autoimmune diseases, the protein triggers an inflammatory response, while for most it's just a regular part of dinner. Scientists from the University of Toronto determined in the early 2000s that the same foods can behave differently depending even on the time of day or what other dishes are consumed alongside them. Even taking probiotics and fermented foods has individual effects. For some, yogurt quickly improves digestion, while for others, it doesn't produce any noticeable effects at all. The same diet can lead to weight loss for some people, or, on the contrary, to weight gain. The secret turned out to be in each person's complete genetic profile and the composition of their microbiome. But the mysteries don't end there. After all, nutrition affects not only metabolism and mood, but even the functioning of the immune system. Sometimes the simplest foods can boost the body's defenses, and sometimes, on the contrary, make it more vulnerable to illness. How does food change immunity and our protection against diseases? And just when it seems that nutrition is merely a matter of energy and habits, medical laboratories around the world are proving otherwise. What we eat directly interacts with our immune system. Scientists from Washington University took 2 large groups of people and over the course of 90 days carefully monitored their diets and the frequency of colds. In the first group, participants ate vegetables, whole grain cereals, lean meats, and plain fermented dairy products. In the second group, the diet was based on processed convenience foods, snacks, sugary drinks, and a minimum of fresh produce. After 3 months, the number of viral infections in the first group was almost half as much, and cases of prolonged illness were noticeably less frequent. Next, biologists from the University of California found that regularly including nuts, berries, and fish in the diet increases the concentration of vitamins C, E, and zinc, which enhance the body's resistance to flu and colds. In an experiment involving 700 volunteers, consuming just 1 handful of walnuts every other day reduced the risk of contracting respiratory infections by 25% over 3 months. Similar results were confirmed by Australian doctors who studied the effects of carrots and spinach on immune cells. Beta-carotene from these vegetables accelerated tissue recovery after any inflammation. Foods rich in fiber held a special place in the research. Harvard specialists demonstrated that fiber directly nourishes beneficial gut bacteria, which in turn trigger the production of short-chain fatty acids. These compounds activate special immune cells that protect against bacterial and viral infections. Those who ate at least 2 servings of vegetables and fruits daily were 40% less likely to catch a cold compared to fans of refined foods. However, dangers can also lurk in the most familiar menu. The School of Nutrition at Johns Hopkins University conducted research. Among volunteers who consume processed meats, chips, and sweets daily, the level of protective immune markers decreased by an average of 30%. In addition, they more frequently experienced inflammation of the mucous membranes, and any scratches or bruises took longer to heal. Interesting data was also obtained regarding probiotics, yogurts, and fermented vegetables. At the University of Wisconsin, it was found that regular consumption of kefir and sauerkraut increased the activity of macrophagesque immune cells that are the first to neutralize dangerous bacteria. However, according to the European Center for Virology, excessive sugar consumption literally deactivated some lymphocytes, leaving the body defenseless even against common infections. An important fact, the immune system responds not only to the quality but also to the regularity of meals. Research at the National Institutes of Health showed that frequent snacking on unhealthy foods reduces antibody production, while the traditional meal schedule breakfast, lunch, and dinner helps maintain the stable functioning of the body's defense systems. However, even the healthiest diet does not guarantee absolute protection if you ignore the individual needs of your body. Researchers are increasingly emphasizing that only a balanced diet that takes into account genetic characteristics and lifestyle truly strengthens the immune system and helps reduce the frequency of illness.